Yeah, the MAGA movement is a cult, and for the most part, and it's built around a personality rather than the United States. It's not the United States, and the MAGA movement is large segments of it are clearly MIGA, or now, of course, it's Iran that Trump has also added to it. But it's make Israel great again. It's not America first. What have we been seeing since Trump came to power? Have we been seeing America first at all? No, it's been genocide, it's been betrayal, it's ethnic cleansing, it's supporting uh, aggression against Iran. MAGA is no different from uh, the previous, politicians, the political activists that ruled in the United States. Europe supports uh, Trump in his support of genocide. Europe supports Trump in his support of aggression on Iran. Europe supports Trump in his own aggression against Iran. There's no substantial difference between the MAGA movement and the liberals, the mainstream liberals in the United States. They may have some divisions over, I don't know, the number of genders that they have, or I don't know, abortion. But when it comes to destroying opposition to the United States, I mean, the liberals, they may be supportive of 101 different genders in the United States, but if anyone stands against the United States, you must crush them
Hmm.
like ants. And that's the same with the MAGA movement. There's no, for the global South, there's no difference. And I think anyone who took the MAGA movement seriously was extraordinarily naive. That doesn't mean that there are not good people out there. I mean, people like, well, I don't want to name names, but there are people out there, and people are in the United States from different political persuasions are waking up to the reality of the Israeli regime and to what the United States is doing. Just like in the 1960s, when the anti-war movement grew, there were lots of decent people who were behind it. In the early 1960s, I'm sure you know that Americans were supportive of the Vietnam War. And then anyone
Of
like the,
course.
the famous case of Muhammad Ali, when he refused to join, he was considered to be trash and a traitor and evil and horrible. It wasn't like later on when he became a figure that people, for the most part, loved and or liked. So that it was a gradual, and of course there are reasons for that, why this happened, when the body bags began to
Mhm.
come back in larger numbers and all that, which I don't want to get into. But in the United States, the MAGA movement aside, there are lots of people in the United States who are awake today, and we see that the majority of Americans, as we've seen in polls, dislike the Israeli regime. Now, the media, because the left and right, they're all trying to demonize Iran right now.
Hmm.
And so I'm pretty sure they'll be able to create some sort of momentum for support for aggression against Iran. The New York Times, Breitbart, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, they're all the same. And even democracy now in its own, in its foolishness, it strengthens these narratives unwittingly maybe, or through their own, cowardly behavior. But this momentum, I don't think, is going to last because the United States is not going to succeed in Iran. And I think that as time goes by, the United States will pay the price for its adversarial behavior towards Iran. The United States is not the United States of the 1990s, and Iran is not the Iran during their client, the Shah's rule in Iran. So you saw that the Iranians have already pushed up the price of oil over the last couple of weeks. And they know how to hurt the Americans in their own subtle way.
Interestingly, in the run-up to this war, the most significant opposition came not from the left, came certainly not from the leadership of the Democratic Party, but came from within the MAGA camp. Names I don't really know, but I'm sure you've seen it as well. There's a virtual civil war within the Republican Party, within the MAGA movement about this, because there's a very clear split between the non-interventionists and the interventionists. As far as the left is concerned, yes, they may be very principled in their opposition to illegal foreign wars, but their influence in the U.S. certainly is extremely marginal and limited. I think the problem with the opposition to this war from within the Republican Party and the MAGA movement is that Trump has transformed the Republican Party into a personality cult. And when you're dealing with a personality cult, people may be opposed to a decision that the cult's leader has not taken. But once that decision has been taken, it becomes much more difficult to continue opposing that decision because then you're basically questioning the sacredness of the cult's leader. So my suspicion, and I'm only speculating, is that the influence of anti-war voices within the Republican MAGA cult is going to be significantly diminished now that Trump has actually taken the decision to go to war, because you're no longer opposing war. You're opposing God. In other words, Trump.
Yes, we've already seen voices like Steve Bannon and even Tucker Carlson to some extent have capitulated. Steve Bannon said that if President Trump can tell us that there is um, a justification for this bombing, then we will support. But as long as we don't see the justification, we will oppose it. And I think that's my main critique of the MAGA movement when it comes to war. I mean, of course, they are terrible
They're
at
not
other
opposed
things.
in principle.
Yeah, exactly. So the argument is that as long as it is not in the American interest, we oppose it. But what if it is in the American interest? I mean, the idea of war cannot be reduced to this principle that it is not in the interest of one nation. It
But
should
but
be
sorry
about.
to interrupt you. But
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt. But that's what the MAGA movement is. America first, and therefore much of the opposition to this war has been, we voted for America first. Why are we now putting Israel first and putting Israel's interests ahead of America's at the cost of American blood and treasure? And so therefore much will also depend on what happens. Will Trump be vindicated in his claims that he has completely obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, that the Iranians won't dare retaliate against the U.S., and that if they do, Iran will be obliterated along with their nuclear program? Or will we see a gradual descent into a regional war and so on? All those things, I think, it's too early to tell. But the other point, of course, is that one skill that Trump does excel in is he is a world-class, highly accomplished demagogue. So all these people, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, and whoever else, they don't stand a chance against him once
Absolutely.
he puts them in their sights. I mean, look at what happened to Tulsi Gabbard. One snap from Trump, and she changed every one of her opinions in the space of, I think, 6.5 hours. She is now, no one on earth is more convinced that Iran already possesses nuclear weapons than Tulsi Gabbard. Why? Because she got a call from the personality cult.
And we should not forget J.D. Vance in the leaked cable, where he
Yes,
was opposing the bombing of Yemen,
precisely.
but the next day he says, "I'm fine."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just to make one more point here is that it's also important to emphasize that things like whether a war is in American interest or not is an extremely ambiguous thing. It's not like 2 plus 2 is 4, because the Lindsey Grahams and all the neocons, the Zionist lobby, they can argue, they can make the same argument that this is in the interest of the United States. So
Exactly.
so the
Yeah.
principles are not challenged, and that's where you see that the libertarians instead are relatively more consistent. The Scott Hortons or Dave Smith and others, because at least they have a principled opposition to war, and so they've
Yeah.
been able to maintain their consistency. But the MAGA movement is extremely weak because their foundation is very shaky, and one can make that argument that it is in our interest. um, okay, I think
Yeah,
one,
if I can
yes,
just make one point
sure.
about that, I fully agree with you. And of course, the national interest is in the eye of the beholder.
Hmm.
And what I may consider absolutely vital for the national interest, you may feel equally strongly would mortally endanger the national interest. And the other point I would make is if the national interest, as interpreted by you or me or whoever, is a legitimate justification for going to war, that means any state, any movement who decides that they have a legitimate national interest to go to war can take that decision and implement it
Absolutely.
without any regard to the norms and rules that are supposed to regulate these things.